Chapter 1. Monday morning. "The execution is this Thursday," said Keith.
Yes, but they've got the wrong man. That kid didn't murder her.
There were 3 inches of snow on the ground in Topeka, Kansas, and it was freezing cold. A man was walking along the sidewalk wearing thin summer clothes. He had a slight limp and was using a stick for support. He didn't seem uncomfortable, and he wasn't in a hurry. He walked past St. Mark's Church. Just beyond it, he pushed open a door with the word "Office" painted on it in dark red. On the other side of the door, there was a young woman at a desk.
"Good morning,"
the man said to her.
"It's very cold out there."
"Yes, it is," she agreed, examining him carefully. She decided not to ask why he wasn't wearing a coat or hat. "I'm Dana Schrader, the minister's wife," she continued. "What can we do for you?" The man sat down slowly on the other side of the desk.
"I need to see the minister,"
he said. "I'm afraid he's in a meeting. He's very busy today," she said with a smile. Nice teeth, he thought, and a nice body. It had been so long since he'd touched a woman. After 10 years of marriage to Keith Schrader, Dana knew her husband well. He wouldn't refuse to see this man, and he wasn't really too busy. She took a form from her desk. "Okay, I'll take some information. Then we'll see what we can do for you." Her pen was ready. "Name?"
"Travis Boyette."
He spelled his name for her.
"Born in 1963, in Joplin, Missouri. Age, 44. Single. No children. No address. No job. No future."
Dana tried to find the right places to write all this information on the form. She didn't know what to say next. His words suggested a lot more questions than they answered. "So where are you staying now?" she asked finally.
"At Anchor House on 17th Street. I've just got out of prison."
Dana knew all about Anchor House. It was a place where criminals lived for a few months after they left prison, before they were completely free. A few minutes later, the minister's meeting finished, and Dana showed Boyette into Pastor Keith Schrader's office. At the age of 35, Keith was happy with his life. He had a great relationship with Dana, their 3 boys, and the members of his church. "Several people from Anchor House have come to St. Mark's," he told Boyette. "I've even held services there."
"It's okay, that place. Better than prison,"
said Boyette. "And why were you in prison?" Keith wanted to know the kind of man that he was talking to. Drugs? Violence? Probably. Or maybe a financial crime. This thin, pale man didn't look like someone who enjoyed hurting people.
"I did a lot of bad stuff. I can't remember it all."
He stared at the carpet. Every few seconds, his head made a sudden jumping movement. After a long silence, Keith said, "What would you like to talk about, Travis?"
"I have a brain tumor, Pastor. It's going to kill me. The doctors at St. Francis Hospital can't do anything. In 6 months or a year, I'll be a dead man."
As he spoke, the pain suddenly hit him. He closed his eyes, breathed hard, and rubbed the sides of his head with his fingers.
"Stupid headaches,"
he said. For a few minutes, he fought the pain. Keith said nothing. Then the pain passed.
I've done some bad things in my life,
Boyette said.
I don't want to take all of it to my grave. Pastor, you're a minister. If I tell you something, will it be our secret?
At the desk outside Keith's office, Dana was looking up Travis Boyette on the internet. He had been found guilty of serious sexual attacks 4 times in 4 different states. He had spent a total of 23 years in prison. She sent a message to Keith's computer explaining what she had learned. She wanted this dangerous man out of the building as soon as possible. Boyette had changed the subject. The conversation had moved on to his bad experiences in prison, and Keith was losing patience. He was a minister, but Boyette didn't want to talk about God. Keith didn't know how to help him. Dana's message arrived on his computer as he was giving Boyette his card. "Prison's a difficult place for rapists, isn't it, Travis?" he said. Boyette didn't seem surprised that Keith knew his history.
Very difficult,
he agreed. "Listen, Travis," continued Keith. "I don't have much time to talk now, but if you phone first, I'll be happy to see you again, and you'll always be welcome at our service on Sundays." Keith wasn't sure if he meant it. Suddenly, Boyette took a page of a newspaper from his pocket.
"Have you heard of the case of Donte Drumm?" he asked.
"No."
"A black kid from a small town in Texas. He was found guilty of murder in 1999. They said he killed a high school cheerleader, a white girl. They never found her body."
Keith looked at the page. The story was the usual thing, just another execution in Texas. This Drumm boy said he was innocent, but criminals always said that. "The execution is this Thursday," said Keith.
"Yes, but they've got the wrong man. That kid didn't murder her."
"And how do you know that, Travis?" Boyette moved closer to Keith. Was he going to whisper something in Keith's ear? Keith's heart raced, but Boyette didn't say a word. There was another long pause. "They never found the body?" asked Keith, reading more of the page. "I should keep him talking," he thought.
"Right. They invented this story that the boy raped her and threw her body into the Red River. All lies."
"So you know where the body is?" Boyette sat up straight and crossed his arms over his chest. He said nothing. "Did you kill her, Travis?" asked Keith.
"I don't know what to do,"
Boyette said. He pushed both hands against his head. Clearly, another headache was starting.
"I'm dying. I'll be dead in a few months. Why should that kid have to die too? He didn't do anything."
His eyes were wet, and he was shaking.
"I have to go,"
he said. "I don't think we're finished yet," said Keith.
"Yes, we are."
"Where's the body, Travis? Maybe we can stop this execution." Boyette laughed.
"No chance. Not in Texas."
He slowly stood, using his stick for support, and limped out of the office.
"Thanks,"
he said, as he passed Dana. Then he was out in the street. In his law office in Sloan, Texas, Robbie Flack was preparing for the worst week of his life. He had had some bad weeks before. 2 wives had left him. He had spent a month in prison after attacking an employee who had stolen money from him. And he had watched the execution of someone who he had defended in court. But that person had been guilty of murder. In 3 days' time, unless something unexpected happened, Robbie was going to watch the execution of an innocent man. The disappearance of Nicole Yarber had been big news in Sloan, Robbie's hometown, in 1998. Nicole was 17, a cheerleader, a popular girl at high school. She spoke to her mother on her cell phone at least 6 times a day. On the December night when she disappeared, she called her mother and promised to be home before midnight. She went to a movie theater and then to a pizza restaurant with some friends. She got up to go to the restroom, and she was never seen again. For 2 weeks, everyone in the town searched for her in fields, side streets, and empty buildings. Then, 2 boys found Nicole's student card on the edge of the Red River. The police kept this discovery secret, but the search moved to the river. Nothing else was found. The police had no idea how to solve the case. Then, 16 days after Nicole disappeared, Detective Drew Kerber received a phone call in the middle of the night. Out of habit, he recorded the conversation. The caller didn't give his name. He said that Nicole had had a secret boyfriend, a black boy called Donte Drumm. When Nicole tried to end their relationship, he killed her and threw her body into the Red River. Detective Kerber knew that Nicole had had a white boyfriend, a football player, called Joey Gamble. Although she and Joey sometimes stopped seeing each other, they always got back together again. Kerber had also heard shocking stories that Nicole had had a secret relationship with a black boy. He hadn't believed the stories at first, but now they started to make sense. Blacks and whites didn't mix much in East Texas, so it was possible that Nicole had kept a relationship with Drumm secret. When Drumm thought that he was losing her, he became jealous and angry. He lost control and killed Nicole. 2 days after the phone call, Drumm was arrested. He confessed to the crime and said that he had thrown Nicole's body into the Red River. Robbie Flack was well known in Texas as a lawyer who supported the poor and powerless. In Sloan, he had heard many complaints about Detective Kerber's methods of questioning, and the 2 men had had some very public arguments in the past. When Robbie heard about Drumm's confession, he drove to the black neighborhood of Sloan. He introduced himself to Drumm's parents, who were scared and confused. He promised to work on their son's case. 9 years later, he and his team were still working on it. Robbie had fought like a madman at Donte's trial. When that hadn't worked, he had made appeals, spoken to politicians, written to newspapers, worked with religious and civil rights groups, insulted the courts, hired experts to argue for Donte's innocence, done everything that could possibly save him, and had spent all of his own money as a result. But now, as he held a meeting with his team to plan their course of action for the week, he knew that he had failed Donte. Unless there was some kind of miracle, Donte was going to die in 3 days' time. 400 miles away, in Topeka, that miracle was starting to happen. Dana and Keith were checking Boyette's story. They both knew that a criminal like Boyette might have lots of reasons to lie. But Keith felt sure that Boyette had murdered Nicole, and Dana trusted her husband's judgment. Dana spoke to the man in charge of Anchor House. Yes, Boyette was staying there. Yes, he had been to St. Francis Hospital recently because of his headaches. He had had tests and was now taking medicine. She then phoned Dr. Herzlich, who worked at the hospital, and came to St. Mark's Church most Sundays. She left a message asking him to call her husband. Keith was looking at information about Donte Drumm on the internet. He was born in 1980, the third child of Roberta and Riley Drumm. The family were, and still are, active members of the Bethel African Church. Donte was playing in high school football games by the age of 14. He was tall, fast, and strong. People thought he had a great future in football. But he didn't finish high school. In 1999, when Donte was 19, he was found guilty of the rape and murder of Nicole Yarber. Donte and Nicole grew up in the same town and went to the same school, but Donte has always said that they were nothing more than friends. Her friends have always believed this too, but some people have said that they were lovers. On the night of her disappearance, Nicole's car was parked in the parking lot at the mall. Joey Gamble, Nicole's boyfriend, said at the trial that he saw a green Ford van driving through the parking lot that night. Donte drove a van like this. But there is reason to think that Gamble was lying. He had heard the stories of a relationship between Donte and Nicole, and he was upset. He invented the evidence of the green van so that the police could blame Donte for the crime. An expert, hired by Donte's lawyers, has studied the voice of the mysterious caller who phoned Detective Kerber and named Donte Drumm as Nicole's killer. The expert believes that the caller was Joey Gamble. Gamble denies this. The phone rang. It was Dr. Herzlich. Keith asked him if he could find out anything about Travis Boyette's brain tumor. Dr. Herzlich agreed to try. While Keith was talking to the doctor, Dana looked at the information about the Drumm case. When Keith put down the phone, she said, "Did you read this?" "Read what? There are hundreds of pages. All the court documents." "Listen," she said, and began to read. "The body of Nicole Yarber has never been found. In some states, a murder case needs a body, but not in Texas. In Texas, they can decide that you are guilty of murder even if there is no clear evidence that a murder has taken place." She looked at her husband. "Can you believe that?" "I'm not sure what to believe," he answered. Chapter 2. Monday afternoon. "His confession was an invention, like your story about the van. People say things that aren't true for many reasons, don't they, Joey?" The private detective followed Joey Gamble for 3 days before making contact. Gamble wasn't hard to find. He worked in a store selling car parts in the city of Houston, his third job in the past 4 years. "Are you Joey?" the detective finally asked. Joey looked down at the name written on his chest. "That's me," he said a little nervously. He had a feeling that the man with the mustache wasn't interested in cars. "My name's Fred Pryor. I'm a private detective working for Donte Drumm's lawyers." "Not another one," thought Joey. "I'll buy you lunch, Joey," continued the detective. "Meet me at that Mexican restaurant around the corner in half an hour. You get lunch, I get time to talk to you. Then maybe you'll never see me again." The doctor was always telling Joey that he should lose some weight, but he loved Mexican food. "Okay, I'll be there." When they had ordered their food at the restaurant, Pryor moved his chair closer to Joey's. "Donte will be executed on Thursday. Did you know that?" Yes, Joey knew. "We're trying to stop the execution," continued Pryor, "and we need your help, Joey. We can't let an innocent man lose his life." "Why are you so sure that he's innocent?" "Because there's no evidence that he did it. Because he was somewhere else at the time. Because his confession was a complete invention. And Joey, because you didn't see a green van in the parking lot that night. It was impossible. Friends of yours say that you weren't anywhere near the parking lot. You invented the story so that the court could find Donte guilty." There was no surprise from Joey, no anger. He had heard it all before. "Did I?" he said calmly. "You were crazy about Nicole, but she wasn't crazy about you. You had a relationship with her, but you didn't have sex. At some point, you started to think that she was seeing someone else. There was a story that the new guy was Donte, which, of course, in Sloan was a big problem because he was black. Then Nicole disappeared, and you saw your opportunity to punish Donte. You sent him to prison, and now you're sending him to his execution. So you're blaming everything on me?" "Yes, I am, Joey. Without your evidence, there was no case. You invented the green van, and you phoned Detective Kerber to give him Dante's name." "I didn't phone Kerber." "Of course you did. We have an expert who's proved it. Do you want to see the report?" "No. The court didn't pay any attention to it. Why should I?" "It was never used in court because we didn't know about your phone call until after the trial. That's because the police hid it from us, which is illegal. But no one cares about that in Texas." Pryor stopped for breath. "Listen, Joey, we're racing against time here. We need your help." "What do you want me to do?" "Sign a document that says what you really saw that night." "Nothing." "And then?" "Well, who knows? Courts don't like it when people change their story hours before an execution. But we have to try. We'll try anything." Joey took a drink from his glass. He said nothing. "Listen," Pryor continued, "I understand how these things can happen. You were very upset when Nicole disappeared. You weren't yourself. The anger against Donte grew, and you decided to take action. You phoned Detective Kerber, and soon Donte had confessed. You thought you'd done the right thing. You thought they'd found the right guy.
You invented the story about the van to make sure that he didn't escape the punishment that he deserved. You did it for Nicole, and for all the people who loved Nicole. Maybe you knew that he would die for the crime one day, or maybe you didn't."
"He confessed,"
said Joey. "Yes, and his confession was an invention, like your story about the van. People say things that aren't true for many reasons, don't they, Joey?"
"So, if I signed the document, would the newspapers find out?"
"Of course they would. They're following the case very closely."
"So, my mom would open her paper and read that I'd lied in court?"
"Yes, but what's more important here, Joey? We're talking about Dante's life."
"You said it might not make any difference. The courts might not stop the execution, so everyone will think I lied and Dante will still die. Who wins then?"
"Dante certainly doesn't." Joey seemed to reach a decision.
"Thanks for the lunch. I have to go."
He got up quickly and walked out of the restaurant. Pryor phoned Robbie Flack.
"Did you hear all that?"
he asked. The purple pen in Pryor's shirt pocket was in fact a microphone. The whole conversation had been recorded.
"Yes, every word,"
replied Robbie.
"But there's nothing we can use."
"No, I didn't think there was."
"You did the best you could,"
said Robbie.
"Phone him again after work. Maybe you can get him out for another drink later."
After hearing from Dr. Herzlich that Boyette definitely had a brain tumor, Keith went to Anchor House. The building was an ugly box built of red brick. Keith walked in and signed his name in the visitor's book. He found Boyette reading a newspaper in a corner of a big living room full of people. Boyette was surprised to see him. "I was in the neighborhood," said Keith. "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Travis led him into the dining room. It was empty. Keith didn't want to waste time.
"Travis, I've been reading about the Donte Drumm case all day. A lot of people think he isn't guilty."
Boyette laughed.
"Of course he isn't guilty. He had no connection with what happened to Nicky."
"What happened to Nicky, Travis?" Boyette looked shocked, like an animal in the headlights of a car. Silence. He rubbed his head. Then he began to shake. Keith took a piece of paper from his coat pocket. "Do you recognize this girl?" he asked. It was a black and white photo of Nicole Yarber, smiling happily in her cheerleader clothes. Boyette stared at it for a long time. His face showed no emotion. Then, suddenly, tears came into his eyes. No noise, just tears, running down his face and falling off his chin onto the table. The two men looked at each other as the tears continued.
"I really want to die,"
said Boyette finally. Keith got them both coffee, while Boyette dried the tears. Then the minister asked again, "What happened to Nicky?"
"She's in a grave in Missouri."
"And did you kill her, Travis?"
"Are you going to tell anyone else, Pastor? Or is this our secret?"
"Why keep it secret, Travis? Why not tell the police and help Drumm?"
"Will you keep it secret or not, Pastor?"
Keith took a deep breath.
"I'll keep it secret if you want me to," he said. Boyette smiled.
I did it, Pastor. I don't know why. I never know why.
The headache returned. Boyette held his head in pain.
I waited for her in the parking lot. I had a gun, so she didn't fight much. Then we left town. We had sex.
You didn't have sex, Travis. You raped her.
Yes, lots of times. Then I did it.
Do you mean you killed her? How?
With her belt. It's still there, in the grave, around her neck.
Where's the grave, Travis?
South of Joplin, Missouri, where I grew up. Lots of hills and woods. No one will ever find her.
Of course, there was a chance that he was lying, thought Keith. But why would anyone want to lie about something like this? He started writing notes on the back of the photo. "What were you doing in Sloan, Texas?" he asked.
I was working for a building company. Terrible job, badly paid, but I couldn't find anything better. The job lasted 5 or 6 months. One Friday night, I saw the lights and found the field behind the school. The football game. I bought a ticket and sat with the crowd. I watched the cheerleaders. I'd always loved cheerleaders. Long legs, short skirts. That's when I fell in love with Nicole. I knew immediately that she was the one.
The next one?
Yes, I went to every game after that. Different seats, wearing a different hat. No one noticed me. And my feelings for Nicole grew and grew. I knew what was going to happen, but I couldn't stop it. I can never stop it.
Did you see Donte Drumm play?
I don't know. I only watched the cheerleaders. But then, suddenly, the football season was over, and there were no more Friday nights with Nicole. I started following her. She was easy to find because she drove a little red BMW. I saw her car in the parking lot that night. I waited and waited. I can be very patient. When the space next to hers was free, I parked in it. After that, it was easy. No one saw anything.
Did you stay in Sloan after you killed Nicole?
Yes, for a few weeks. Everyone was looking for her all around the city. They were so stupid. She was in a grave 200 miles away. He laughed. And then I lost my job. Silly, really. I was driving when I was drunk. The police stopped me, then found out that my car was stolen. I spent a week in a police cell in Sloan. It was funny. They'd caught the murderer, but they didn't know it. They were busy trying to blame everything on Donte Drumm. They let me go, but I was arrested a few months later for something else.
Another sexual attack?
I tried, but the girl knew how to fight. I was sent to prison for 6 years.
Did you spend much of that time thinking about Nikki, Travis? Did you feel sorry for her family?
I was raped when I was 8 years old, replied Boyette. I don't remember anyone feeling sorry for me. Listen, Pastor, all my life I've wanted to be normal. I've tried to stop hurting people, stay out of prison, get a job. I didn't choose to be like this.
Keith crossed his arms in front of his chest and stared at Boyette. Finally, he said, "Now is your chance to do something right, Travis. You can make a difference. Tell me where her grave is, and maybe we can stop an execution."
"No one will be able to find her grave. I'm not sure if I'll be able to find it. And the law says that I can't leave Kansas. I'm not allowed to go to Missouri and look for Nicky. If I do, they'll put me back in prison."
What difference does that make?
"I want to look after my mother. She needs me."
Your mother is dead, Travis. I read that on Google.
"What's Google?"
asked Travis. He really has spent a lot of time in prison, thought Keith. It's an internet search company. How many lies have you told me today, Travis? Why should I believe anything that you say?
"You want me to prove it to you, Pastor?"
he said angrily.
"Look at this."
He showed Keith a gold ring, much too small for Boyette's fingers. There was some writing on it. ANY on one side, and SHS 1999 on the other.
"Alicia Nicole Yarber, Sloan High School, and the year her class graduated," said Boyette. "Show that to her mother, and watch her cry."
Keith picked it up and looked at it for a minute, then gave it back to Boyette. "Do something good for a change, Travis," Keith said quietly. "Do it quickly, before it's too late."
"I don't like it when people say I'm lying, Pastor. Just leave me alone."
Travis opened the door, then closed it loudly behind him. Police Detective Drew Kerber and District Attorney Paul Coffey walked toward the house that had been the home of Nicole Yarber. They needed to talk to her mother, Reva. They had visited Reva often in the last 9 years. Sometimes she was warm and friendly, but she could also be frightening. For 2 weeks after Nicole's disappearance, it had seemed that she was always on TV. She cried for her daughter on camera and loudly criticized the city's officials for failing to find the murderer. Then, when Drumm was arrested, she celebrated just as loudly. She didn't need any evidence to believe that he was guilty. She just knew. She went to church regularly, and she was sure that God agreed with her. Drumm's execution couldn't come soon enough. At the trial, she found it hard to keep quiet. When he was found guilty and led away to prison, she shouted,
"You murdered my baby! I'll be there when you take your last breath."
She drove down the Red River and spent days staring into the water, looking for her daughter there. She even searched for Nicky in big cities. In her heart, she knew that Nicky was dead, but she had to do something. Reva greeted Kerber and Coffey enthusiastically and led them into her large study. Pictures of Nicole smiled down at them from all the walls. Reva talked about Donte's execution on Thursday, who was coming with her to watch it, what time she was going to get there. Then Coffey and Kerber turned the conversation to the subject that had brought them to her home. Reva was planning to do an interview with Sean Fordyce, the presenter of a TV show about murder cases. Coffey and Kerber didn't think this was a good idea.
"Fordyce loves to make trouble. Then he can film it," said Coffey. but we don't want any trouble here in Sloan."
"The blacks here are very upset," continued Kerber. "We might even see some violence on Thursday night. We don't want Fortis here to make things worse than they already are." Fortis was famous for his strong opinions about the death penalty. He was always saying that executions were too easy, too peaceful. He wanted murderers to have more painful deaths. He knew that an interview with Riva would be good TV. He was paying her $50,000.
"Please don't do this, Riva," said Coffee.
"I'm not going to change my mind, Paul. I'm doing this for Nicole and for all the other murdered kids out there."
There might be more murdered kids after Thursday night, thought Coffee. But he knew Riva. She had made her decision. There was nothing that he and Kerber could do to stop this interview. On the other side of town, Robbie Flack was visiting Dante's mother, Roberta, and her children, Marvin, Cedric, and Andrea. Roberta looked older than her 56 years. Since the death of her husband, Riley, 6 years ago, she hadn't eaten much.
"The execution is scheduled for 6 p.m. on Thursday," said Robbie. "We'll fight until the end, but there's not much hope at this stage, I'm afraid. The last family visit is at 8 on Thursday morning at Polunsky Prison, before Donte is taken to Huntsville for the execution. But it's just like a normal visit. There'll be glass between you, and you can only talk on the phone. It's crazy, but this is Texas."
"We can't touch him?"
asked Andrea. Roberta began to cry.
"I can't kiss my baby goodbye,"
she said softly. Then,
"I'm sorry."
"Don't be sorry," said Robbie. "If I was in your situation, I'd be shouting and screaming and shooting people."
Long after their boys were asleep, Keith and Dana Schrader were in the kitchen, looking at the information about Donte Drumm that his defense lawyers had put on the internet. Some of it was about Dante's confession. 18 days after the disappearance of Nicole Yarber, at about 5 p.m., detectives Drew Kerber and Jim Morrissey asked Donte Drumm if he would talk to them about Nicole. Donte felt a little nervous, but he wanted to help. As he knew nothing about her disappearance, he thought that a meeting would only take a few minutes. He agreed to meet the detectives at the police station and drove there himself. He told no one where he was going. When he walked into the police station, he didn't know that these were his last steps as a free man. Donte was led to an interview room. Morrissey asked him to sign a piece of paper that allowed the detectives to interview him without a lawyer in the room. As Donte had nothing to hide, he decided to sign. The interview started at 5:25 p.m. Kerber asked the questions. For a long time, they talked about the football season. Then, finally, Kerber asked Donte about his relationship with Nicole. How long had he known her? Were they friends? Did they have a lot of classes together? Then the questions became more serious. Had he ever met her privately? Was he in love with her? Donte answered no, again and again, but Kerber just repeated the same questions. Donte began to worry. He asked Kerber if he could go home or phone his mother to tell her where he was. The answer was no. After 2 hours in the interview room, Kerber said that he had a witness who knew all about Donte and Nicole's relationship. In fact, there was no witness. This was a lie, but police are allowed to lie during an interview. Kerber told the imaginary witness's story of Dante's jealousy and anger toward Nicole. "Your witness is lying," Donte said again and again. Kerber moved on to the night of Nicole's disappearance. Did Donte drive to the mall that night? No, he was at home with his little sister. His green van was parked outside his house. Kerber said that his van was seen at the parking lot at the mall that night. At that point, Donte started to think that he was in serious trouble. Kerber asked Donte if he had killed Nicole. Donte denied it angrily. Kerber said that he didn't believe Donte. The same questions and the same answers again and again. At 9:45, Kerber stood up and marched out of the room. The other detective, Morrissey, gave Donte something to eat and drink. At the same time, Dante's friend Tori was sitting in a different interview room. A detective was asking about the girls at high school. Did Tori know Nicole Yarber? No, not really. Tori laughed when the detective suggested that Nicole and Donte were dating. Of course that wasn't true. After 30 minutes, the detective left the room. Tori sat at a table and waited. Kerber returned to Dante's room and told him that they had a new witness. The witness said that Donte and Tori had raped Nicole in the back of the green van and thrown her body into the Red River. This was so crazy that Donte laughed. He said Kerber was crazy to believe this person's lies. Kerber and Donte shouted at each other for some time. Then Kerber said, "If you're not guilty, prove it. Take a lie detector test." Donte liked this idea. Maybe he could finally prove that he was innocent. The test took about an hour. Donte passed it easily, but Kerber said that he had failed. He waved the test results in Dante's face and said that, with this evidence, the courts were definitely going to find him guilty. "They're going to execute you," Kerber said again and again. Donte sat in silence, shocked and confused. "Sometimes," Kerber explained, "good people do bad things. Then, because they feel so guilty, their brain blocks the memory of the crime." He said that he had seen this many times. This was probably what had happened to Donte. Donte continued to deny everything. Kerber continued to talk about Dante's certain death. Then, finally, he said, "There is another choice. If you confess now, I can save you from execution. You'll spend your life in prison, but you'll live." The police are not allowed to make promises like this in an interview. At midnight, another detective came into the room and said, "Tori's here, and he's talking." Kerber and Morrissey smiled at each other. They showed Donte a photo of Nicole. Tired, alone, and frightened, he took one look at her pretty face and started crying. After a few minutes, he stopped and asked to go to the restroom. As he was taken there, Donte saw Tori in an interview room. He was writing on legal paper. Donte couldn't believe it. When Donte returned from the restroom, Kerber read from a piece of paper. He said that it was the evidence given by Tori. Donte had a secret relationship with Nicole, he read. He was crazy about her. When she tried to end it, he followed her everywhere. I was worried that he might hurt her. In fact, Tori had written that he knew nothing about Nicole's disappearance. But the police are allowed to lie during an interview. Donte closed his eyes. He tried to understand what was happening. But it was 2 a.m. now, and he was very tired. He could not think straight. He asked if he could go home. Kerber shouted at him. Donte asked if he should have a lawyer. Kerber said that a lawyer couldn't save his life. Only they, Kerber and Morrissey, could do that. Kerber offered Donte another lie detector test. At first, Donte said no. But the tests were done in a different room, away from Kerber. Donte wanted so much to be away from Kerber that he finally agreed to the second test. Although he passed the test, he was again told that he had failed. Donte started to doubt his own memory. Maybe he had killed Nicole and forgotten all about it. He wanted so badly to go home to his bed that he was prepared to confess to murdering his own mother. The police would find Nicole's body soon, he thought, so they would realize that his confession was a lie. At 5:30 a.m., 12 hours after the start of the interview, Donte said, "Okay, I'll tell you everything." For the next 3 hours, they worked on the story. When Donte could not answer a question, Kerber helped him. Finally, at 8:21 a.m., they switched on the video camera and recorded a 17-minute confession. Later, after some sleep, Donte Drumm met with a lawyer and said that his confession was untrue. The judge at the trial said that she had doubts about the confession, but the video was still shown in court. It was later discovered that the judge, Vivian Grail, was having a secret relationship with the district attorney, Paul Coffey. Coffey was presenting the evidence against Donte at the trial, and it was important to Coffey that Donte was found guilty. Maybe this was the reason that the judge allowed a jury with no black people on it, and the reason that the video was shown to them. The video is now sending Donte Drumm to his execution. Chapter 3. Tuesday. You've let him stay in prison for 9 years for something that he didn't do. You've wasted yesterday and today. If you wait any longer, it'll be too late. At 8:30 on Tuesday morning, a message arrived at the office of Robbie Flack. It was a message that everyone expected. Donte Drumm hadn't been pardoned by the Texas judges. "So now we'd better ask the governor for a pardon," said Robbie with a bitter smile. His team had sent enormous amounts of paperwork on the Drumm case to different organizations over the years. A document to ask Gil Newton, the governor of Texas, for a pardon was certainly the biggest waste of paper. Newton loved executions, and people voted for him because of this. Before becoming governor, he had worked as a district attorney and sent 5 criminals to their deaths. He had even watched 2 of them die. The rest of the team gave Robbie their news. On the phone, Pryor said that he had met Nicole's boyfriend Gamble again, but had had no luck. Gamble seemed scared.
Coffey's probably told him that he'll go to prison if he changes his evidence,
said Robbie. The district attorney wanted Donte's execution to happen as much as Robbie wanted to stop it.
But let's be ready for Gamble if he changes his mind.
Sammy, can you prepare a document that he can sign?
It's almost finished,
said Sammy, a middle-aged woman who had worked as a lawyer with Robbie for many years.
A girl named Greta wants to marry Donte,
said Fanta, Robbie's secretary.
She's in Germany.
That's the 5th girl this week, isn't it?
asked Robbie.
Why do so many European women want to marry guys who only have a few days to live? It doesn't make sense.
There was also a message from a church minister in Topeka, Kansas, continued Fanta. He says he might know who killed Nicole.
Great. Another crazy person. We had hundreds last week. Don't bother calling back.
Start the cameras, shouted the producer on the Fortis show. Sean Fortis spoke to the camera, explaining where he was and who he was with. Then he turned to Riva.
Do you miss Nicole? He asked.
The tears started immediately, but Riva had cried on TV so many times that now she could talk and cry at the same time. As she spoke about Nicole, she gave Fortis all the emotion that he was looking for.
Drumm's execution is on Thursday. Do you plan to be there? He asked.
Oh, yes, she replied. That animal took my daughter's life. He deserves to die, and I want to see him take his last breath.
How do you think you'll feel at the end? He asked.
When you lose your child, Sean, there is no end, she replied sadly. The pain continues forever.
As soon as the interview was finished, Fortis flew to Florida to record another show. But he left some of his team in Sloan to film any violence that started. And he himself planned to interview Riva again after the execution. Keith Schrader went back to Anchor House to talk to Boyette, but Boyette wasn't there.
He had a seizure last night,
said the guy at the front desk.
They took him to the hospital.
Keith finally found him on the 3rd floor of St. Francis Hospital. The patient was awake, but he had a tube in his arm. He smiled when he saw Keith.
Thanks for coming, Pastor,
he said weakly. What happened, Travis? asked Keith.
It was your fault, Pastor. You made me get upset last night. The headaches didn't stop. I had a seizure, so they brought me here.
I'm sorry, Travis, but please remember that you came to me for help.
I didn't start this.
True.
I've been speaking to a friend of mine. He's a lawyer. He says that lots of people confess to a crime just before someone else is executed. They're crazy people who want attention. He says, I shouldn't believe you.
Do you believe me?
Yes, I do. I've checked with people at Sloan, and your story fits. You were arrested in 1999 for driving while drunk. You lied about your mother, but you're not lying about this. You killed Nicole. Boyette closed his eyes. It's going to be hard to make other people listen, though, continued Keith. I think we ought to make a video. You make your confession, giving as much detail as possible so that people believe you. Then you give me the ring, and I'll take a photo of it. I'll send the photo and the video electronically to Donte's lawyers, the district attorney, the governor, the police, the judges, the TV stations, to anyone who might listen. We can make a video here, today, in the hospital. You don't even have to leave your bed. The eyes stayed closed. Are you there, Travis?
Uh-huh,
said the patient on the bed. I can do it now, with my cell phone, if you want.
You're hurting my head, Pastor. I think I'm going to have another seizure. You need to leave now.
He repeated himself more loudly, so that the nurses could hear.
Please leave, and don't come back.
Robbie Flack was on his way to Donte's prison. With him, he had a doctor, a specialist. Texas didn't execute crazy people, so Robbie was trying to prove that Donte was crazy. The doctor's name was Dr. Hinz. She had already examined Donte's letters to Robbie. The earliest ones described his life in Huntsville prison, where he was sent when he was first found guilty of murder. There, he had been quite busy. He worked for 4 hours a day at the clothes factory at the prison and went outside for exercise every day. He could go to classes and religious services, watch TV, and have a shower. Twice a week, he was allowed visitors. In his letters, he complained about the noise in the prison at all times of the day and night. He never had enough sleep. In bed, he cried for the family that he missed so much. Soon, though, he was missing the noise of Huntsville prison. When 5 prisoners tried to escape, everyone was moved to a new prison, Polunsky. There were no classes, no religious services. Prisoners could only leave their cells for an hour a day, and spent this hour in an empty room with only a guard for company. Prisoners were woken at 3 a.m. for breakfast. Why at that time? Wrote Donte. Nobody knows, and nobody asks. They had lunch at 3 p.m. and supper at 10 at night. The food was terrible. Twice a week they were taken to an outside space to look at the sky. There was nothing to do and no one to talk to. Donte read the Bible for hours every day, and he wrote letters, lots of letters. His long letters to Robbie were full of hope that he could prove his innocence. When his appeal failed, he almost stopped trying. But he remembered an accident that he'd had during a football game. Crazy with pain, he had managed to keep playing. Maybe,
he could find that kind of strength again. He started exercising in his cell until he became fitter than he had been as a football player. His letter writing opened new worlds. He exchanged letters with a 15-year-old girl in New Zealand called Millie, whose parents didn't mind, but who read all his letters. She sent a photo of herself, and Donte fell in love. He spent all his time exercising and thinking about a life with Millie when he was finally let out of prison. The death of his father was a big shock. Donte was too upset to do his usual exercise. Then, after sending a letter every month for 2 years, Millie stopped writing. Donte stopped trying. Day after day, he lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Now, Donte was a 27-year-old in the body of an old man. He often slept for 18 hours a day, and when he was awake, he did nothing. He refused to talk to the guards, and often had trouble understanding their simplest commands. He never exercised. He never read. And his letters were short and difficult to understand, with lots of mistakes in the grammar and spelling, and terrible handwriting. When Robbie and Dr. Hinz arrived at the prison, they were led to the visitors' room. Visitors and prisoners sat opposite each other, with a thick sheet of glass between them. They had to communicate by phone. Donte was always happy to see Robbie. At first, he'd believed that his lawyer could save him from execution. Now he knew that the Texas legal system was too powerful even for Robbie. But they smiled at each other today through the glass. Robbie gave him the latest news about the case and about his family. He had visited their home the night before and gave all the details. Then Dr. Hinz took the phone. She asked him questions about his life in prison and the reasons he was there. His answers were confused. After an hour of conversation, she felt sure that Donte had lost his mind. Keith and Dana were in bed, but they couldn't sleep. They had to do something to save Donte Drumm. But what? At 11:04 p.m., the phone rang. Keith picked it up.
Listen, Pastor, I don't want that boy to die,
said a familiar voice. You mean Drumm? Well, you've let him stay in prison for 9 years for something that he didn't do. You've wasted yesterday and today. If you wait any longer, it'll be too late.
Maybe you can drive me to Sloan.
Maybe you can take the bus, Travis, said Keith. It was illegal for Boyette to leave Kansas. As a minister, he didn't want to be responsible for the trip.
I haven't got any money for a bus, and I might have a seizure on the way. No, I need you to take me, Pastor.
I have a better idea. You remember that lawyer friend that I told you about? Tomorrow, we'll go to his office here in Topeka. We'll make a video of your confession, and my friend can phone the lawyers in Sloan. Then you won't have to make any illegal trips. What do you think? Silence on the other end of the phone. 5 seconds. 10 seconds.
Maybe it'll work, said Boyette finally. I can leave the hospital at 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Okay, Travis? I'll meet you then.
Chapter 4. Wednesday.
Listen, Keith. Thanks for trying to help, but I'm a busy man. Please leave me alone.
Robbie put down the phone. It was 7 a.m., and Robbie Flack's office was already busy. Dr. Hinz had worked on her report about Donte all through the night. It said that his mind had gone because he had been alone for so many years in the cruel conditions at Polunsky Prison. The Court of Appeals was years behind most legal organizations. It didn't accept any legal documents electronically. Robbie's secretary, Fanta, had to send Dr. Hinz's report to the computer of Cicely Avis in Austin. Cicely worked for the Defender Group, an organization that was against the death penalty and fought for the lives of lots of prisoners. She could print the document and deliver it by hand to the Court of Appeals. Pryor had met with Gamble again, but was making no progress. There was no answer yet from the governor's office, but a pardon wasn't expected. After months and years of activity on the Drumm case, there was nothing much to do. Everyone was suddenly tired. The waiting had begun. When Keith arrived at St. Francis Hospital, Boyette wasn't there. A nurse told him that Boyette had disappeared before she could give him his 6 a.m. check. Keith phoned Anchor House. The people there hadn't seen him. Keith felt angry with himself. He knew that this man often lied. Boyette was a thief, a rapist, and a murderer. So why had he allowed himself to trust him? He called Robbie Flack's office again. The phone was answered by Robbie's secretary, Fanta. Keith explained that he'd called yesterday and left a message. "I need to speak to Mr. Flack. I have important information about the murder of Nicole Yarber."
"What type of information?"
asked Fanta. "I'll discuss that with Mr. Flack," he replied.
"Okay, I'll give him the message,"
she said, and put the phone down. Robbie Flack hadn't called back yesterday. It was unlikely that he would call today. Keith decided to write him a message. Typing at his computer, he reported his conversations with Boyette and described in detail the actions that he'd taken to check Boyette's story. Then he pressed send. A minister shouldn't tell anyone else a person's secrets. But in this situation, he had no choice. Drumm's life might depend on it. In Sloan, the protest started at noon. Most of the stores had closed, and the only white people in the streets were police officers and reporters. The crowd grew and grew. Black students from the high school left their classes to be there. Factory workers brought their lunch boxes and ate their sandwiches while they listened to the speakers. The first speaker was a black civil rights protester. He said that Drumm's trial was a bad joke, with its all-white jury and the district attorney sleeping with the judge. He said that the appeal system was a worse joke because it hadn't changed the result of the first trial. He said again and again that Donte was innocent. The shouts of agreement from the crowd got louder and louder. The second speaker was John Canty, the minister at the Bethel African Church, where the Drumm family went on Sundays. He thanked God for his laws and reminded the crowd of the most important law of all. You must not kill. He asked God to give strength to Nicole's family and to forgive the Christians who supported the killing of God's people in executions. The last speaker was a high school student. He started calling out the names of the 28 black players on the Sloan football team. One after the other, they came to stand in front of the crowd.
These players stand shoulder to shoulder with their brother, Donte Drumm, continued the student. If the city of Sloan succeeds in the illegal execution of an innocent man, his brothers will not play in the football game on Friday.
The whites in Sloan loved the football team. They would be very upset if half the team didn't play in the game. The crowd went wild. Robbie Flack looked at his messages. He saw the name Schrader and remembered he'd seen it earlier. He called the number that Fanta had written. Keith answered his cell phone.
Hello, this is Robbie Flack in Sloan, Texas. You left me a message.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Flack.
Call me Robbie. Tell me, where's the body?
In Missouri.
I have no time to waste, and I think I'm wasting my time here.
Just give me 5 minutes, said Keith.
Okay. Talk fast.
Keith told Robbie the facts as fast as he could. When he'd finished, Robbie asked,
Where is Boyette now?
I don't know, but I'm hoping to see him at 6 p.m. tonight.
And this guy has been found guilty of 4 sex crimes?
At least.
No one will believe him, Pastor. You have to understand, there are always lots of crazy people with stories like this before an execution. How soon can he find the body?
I don't know.
Come on, Pastor. Give me something that I can use.
He has her ring. I've held it. It has SHS 1999 ANY on it.
This is good, Keith. I like it. Where's the ring now?
Around his neck, I expect.
And you don't know where he is?
No, not exactly, but...
Listen, Keith. Thanks for trying to help, but I'm a busy man. Please leave me alone.
Robbie put down the phone. In his office in Austin, Governor Gil Newton met with his 2 closest friends and advisors, Wayne Walcott and Barry Ringfield.
The blacks have planned protests about the Drumm case all over Texas, said Walcott.
Yes, there's a lot of interest in this one,
agreed Ringfield.
We've had a lot of calls asking us to stop the execution.
Who from?
Asked Newton.
The usual people, the President of France, some Dutch politicians, the head of the Catholic Church.
Anybody important?
Not really.
According to the rules, Boyette could not be away from Anchor House between 6 p.m. and 8 a.m. unless he had permission. It was 6 p.m., and Keith Schrader was at Anchor House. There was no sign of Boyette.
You'd better go and find him, said the man on the front desk. If he comes back soon, they'll just give him a warning. But if he's out all night, they'll send him back to prison.
Keith had no idea where to look. He asked at all the hospitals in town. No luck. He tried the bus station and the park by the river. Nothing. At 9, he went back to Anchor House. Boyette was still out.
"I'll give you a call if I see him,"
said the guy on the desk. Thanks, said Keith, with a worried smile. He went home for a late supper. There was nothing useful to do at Robbie's office, but no one had gone home. This was probably the last night of Donte Drumm's life, and his lawyers wanted to spend it together. They opened some beers and ordered pizza. Then they started a game of cards. It was 9:10 when the news came on the TV. A church was on fire in Sloan. It was a church that only white people went to. Reva and her family were its most famous members. The violence had begun. Keith had just fallen asleep when the phone rang. Dana answered it, then passed it to her husband.
"Hi, Pastor. It's me, Travis."
Hello, Travis. Where are you?
"In a cafe somewhere."
His voice was slow. He'd had some drinks. You need to go back to Anchor House. They're waiting for you there.
"Forget it, Pastor. I'm not going back. I want to go to Texas. I'll tell them everything. We have to save that boy."
We?
"Who else can take me?"
You want me to take you to Texas now? Keith asked, looking at his wife. Dana shook her head. Where are you, Travis?
"A cafe? It's called the Blue Moon, not far from Anchor House."
I know it. Okay, Travis. I'll be there in 15 minutes.
"Thank you, Pastor."
When Keith had put down the phone, Dana asked, What are you doing? You can't take this man to Texas. It's against the law. You could lose your job if you do this. They'll execute an innocent man tomorrow if I don't do it, Dana. What choice do I have? He got dressed, kissed Dana, and left the house. Chapter 5. Through the Night. It felt like a bad dream. But she'd lived this bad dream for 9 years now, since she first heard that her son had confessed to Nicole's murder. At 12:30 a.m., Robbie's home phone started ringing. Still half asleep, Robbie picked it up.
"Wake up, Robbie. It's Fred Pryor. I've got something interesting here."
What is it, Fred? Asked Robbie, trying to force himself awake.
"I had another drink with Joey Gamble. He got drunk and finally confessed to everything. He said he'd lied about seeing the green van. He said he'd phoned Kerber with the story that Donte was dating Nicole. Everything. He was crying and crying. He said he and Donte had been good friends when they were younger. He'd always thought that the police would realize their mistake. He's now finally understood that they're going to kill Donte if he doesn't do something. He thinks it's all his fault. It was beautiful."
This is great, Fred, said Robbie.
"It is, and it isn't. He still refuses to sign anything to say that he's lied."
Why?
"His mom, Robbie. He doesn't want her to think that he lied in court. I tried and tried to make him agree, but he refuses to do it."
Did you record everything?
"Of course. The music in the bar was quite loud, but you can hear what he's saying." How soon can you be in Sloan?
If I drive through the night, I can be with you in about 5 hours.
Keith was driving south. A 12-hour trip through the night was never much fun. But a trip with a man as strange and dangerous as Boyette in the seat next to him was a lot worse. Keith pretended that Boyette wasn't there. Suddenly, the tiredness hit Keith like a wave. His eyes closed. The car went dangerously close to the edge of the road before he forced his eyes open again. Next to him, Boyette noticed nothing.
Shall we listen to some music?
Asked Keith, his heart beating fast. He turned on his favorite radio station. He sang wildly and moved his hands and left foot to the music. He felt awake again, but he was worried. He'd fallen asleep so quickly. What could he do to stop it from happening again?
Talk to me, Travis, he said finally. Tell me about your family.
At first, Boyette didn't answer. But then he seemed to change his mind.
My mother lived with a man named Darrell. He was okay, I guess. I called him Dad. My older brother called him Dad, too, so I thought he was my father. When I went to court the first time, I found out that my real dad had left before I could remember. That really hurt. I was about 12. Then Darrell disappeared.
What about your brother? Are you still in contact with him?
We write to each other sometimes. He's in prison in Illinois.
No surprise there, thought Keith.
Why is he in prison?
He has a drugs problem, so he steals, but he's not a very good burglar. Last time, he got into a fight in a house and put the other guy in the hospital.
But he's never raped anyone?
No, but he was older than me. My uncle, well, Darrell's brother, liked sleeping with little boys. He didn't leave me alone when I was a kid, but he wasn't interested in my brother. Why are you asking all these questions?
I'm tired, Travis. I haven't had much sleep since I met you on Monday. I'm trying to stay awake.
I don't like all these questions.
There'll be a lot more questions when you get to Texas.
They continued in silence for an hour or more. Boyette stared out of the window. Keith realized that he was driving too fast. He slowed down a little. He was helping a criminal to leave Kansas illegally, so he really didn't want a police officer to stop him now. Without warning, Boyette started talking again.
We called him Uncle Chet. He used to take me fishing. At least, that was what he told my parents. We went to his little house in the country, but we never caught any fish. At first, I didn't understand what he was doing. I was only 8. It hurt a lot, but I was too scared to fight back. And he wasn't mean. He bought me ice cream and pizza. He gave me a cigarette and a taste of his beer. I thought maybe all adults did that to kids. After each fishing trip, he had a serious talk with me. He showed me the gun that he kept in his car. He said that he liked his little secrets, and I mustn't tell anyone. If I told anyone, he'd have to kill me. And he'd have to kill the people that I told, too, even my mom and Darrell. I never told anyone. I think my mother knew,
but she had her own problems. She was drunk most of the time. So I spent a lot of time at Uncle Chet's house. When I was older, he gave me drugs. We used to sit at his house, smoking and drinking and doing drugs. I enjoyed it. I didn't like the other stuff that he did to me, but that didn't last long. Then, one day, my mother said we were leaving town. She couldn't pay the bills. So we drove away in the middle of the night and started living in Joplin, Missouri. After that, we didn't see Uncle Chet, but the damage had been done. If I saw him now, I'd kill him. Can I smoke? Keith didn't want cigarette smoke in the car, but he was feeling tired again. He decided to stop at the next gas station so that he could have a rest, and Boyette could have a smoke. Boyette went into the woods with his cigarette. Keith walked up and down, trying to wake himself up. For a minute, he couldn't see Boyette. Maybe he planned to run away. Good, thought Keith. Then I can go home to Dana and forget about this crazy trip. But how would he feel if Boyette hurt someone? And what about Drumm? He didn't have to worry about that for long. Soon, Boyette stepped out of the trees, and he and Keith got back in the car. More miles in silence. But as soon as Keith felt sleepy again, he asked, "So, you first went to court when you were 12? Yes. My friend Eddie and I stole some stuff from a store. Beer, cigarettes, candy. We went into the woods and got drunk. It was great, but we hadn't noticed the video camera in the store. It wasn't as much fun after the police watched the video. It was my first crime, so they just gave me a warning. But Eddie had been caught before, so they sent him to a special school for young criminals. I never saw him again. I was always getting into trouble after that. Eddie had gone, but there were lots of other bad boys around. It was a rough neighborhood. Darryl shouted at me when I was caught, but he wasn't always there. My mother was too drunk to care. My brother went to a school like Eddie's when he was 15. I was 13 when I was sent away. Have you ever visited a school like that, Pastor? No. They're terrible places. Most of the kids there aren't bad, not at first. They just had a bad start in life. But there aren't enough guards, so the violence never stops. You have to join a gang for protection. You go to classes, but they're a joke. You can't learn anything. And because it said in my paperwork that my uncle had raped me, some of the guards raped me too. After 2 years of hell, I went home. I tell you, the system's crazy. Before I was sent away, I was a kid with some problems. After 2 years at that school, I was much more dangerous. But society wants to send more kids to places like that. Are you blaming your school for Nicole's murder? Boyette looked away. It was a big question. I did something very wrong, Pastor. But I couldn't stop myself. Why not? Because of what I am. And I wasn't born this way. Society made me this way.
The Drumm family was spending the night at a cheap hotel not far from Polunsky Prison. In the morning, they could have a 4-hour visit with Donte before he was taken to Huntsville and his execution. Roberta Drumm couldn't sleep. She'd had so little sleep in the last few weeks that her tiredness now kept her awake. Even sleeping pills didn't help. In the bed next to hers, her daughter Andrea moved in her sleep. Roberta thought about the next day, her visit to Donte in the morning, then the trip to the witness room at Huntsville. There, she would watch Donte die. It felt like a bad dream. But she'd lived this bad dream for 9 years now, since she first heard that her son had confessed to Nicole's murder. It had become a book as long as her Bible, with sadness and disbelief on every page. She remembered seeing Donte in a cell for the first time, with his orange suit and his wild, scared eyes. She remembered the hope of a fair trial, and the shock when the trial was completely unfair. She remembered the endless appeals and the disappearing hope. She remembered the visits to Polunsky, where she saw a strong, healthy boy slowly become a living ghost.
"Are you awake, Mom?"
Andrea asked softly.
"Of course I am,"
she replied.
"Did you sleep at all?" "I don't think so." "Mom, I have to tell you something. I've never told anyone else this, and I never will. But I want you to know it before they take Donte." "What is it, Andrea?" "There was a time, after the trial, when I didn't believe Donte. When I listened to his confession in court, it really worried me. I could imagine Donte dating that girl, but afraid that someone might see them together. I could imagine Donte getting angry when she tried to finish the relationship. Maybe he'd left the house in secret that night after I'd gone to sleep. I badly wanted to believe that the legal system worked. I decided that he was probably guilty. I kept writing to him. I kept coming to visit him. But secretly, I thought he'd murdered her." "What made you change your mind?" "Robbie, do you remember the appeal about a year after the trial? We were sitting in that big courtroom, looking at those 9 judges with their white faces and their black clothes. Robbie stood up and told them how weak the evidence was. He said that the confession was a bad joke. He was so angry and believed so strongly that they had the wrong man. That white guy from the rich part of town had no doubt that my brother was innocent. And that's when I knew for sure that I believed Donte. I felt so ashamed that I'd ever doubted him." "It's okay, Andrea. Please don't tell anyone." "Never." They moved to the edges of their beds and held hands. "Do you want to cry, or do you want to pray?" asked Andrea. "We can pray later, but we can't cry later," said her mother. "Okay, let's have a good cry." The traffic was heavier as they got to Oklahoma City. Boyette's head was resting on the passenger's window, and his mouth was open. He had been asleep for about 2 hours. Keith was happy to drive in silence after having a strong cup of coffee at their last stop. South of Oklahoma City, Boyette woke suddenly.
He shook his head and stretched his legs.
"Can we stop soon?" he asked Keith. "I need the bathroom."
"Sure," replied Keith. What else could he say? But they were making slow progress. His best guess was that they wouldn't arrive in Sloan until noon, and all these stops weren't helping. They stopped in the next town. Boyette went to the bathroom, then had 2 cigarettes. Keith had another coffee. Then they were back on the road. It was 5:50 a.m. when they saw the police car hiding in the trees. Keith checked his speed and knew he was in trouble. He slowed down, but too late. A blue light appeared behind them. The police car was asking them to stop. "Don't say a word, Travis," said Keith as he stopped at the side of the road. The police officer had stopped too and was walking toward them. Keith made sure that his minister's collar was easy to see. "Good morning, officer," he said as the man finally arrived at the car window. He gave him his driver's license and car documents.
"Are you a church minister?"
the officer asked. The officer didn't seem to like religion very much. "Yes, I am," replied Keith with a warm smile. "Keep calm," he said to himself.
"Well, Pastor, you were driving at 85 miles an hour. The speed limit here is 75. What's the hurry?"
Keith managed to answer politely, "There's no hurry, officer. I just wasn't paying attention." His heart was racing now. One question about Boyette, and they were in big trouble. But the police officer seemed satisfied. He walked back to his own car, shut the door, and began his paperwork. While they were waiting, Keith made a call to Robbie Flack's office. There was no answer, which wasn't surprising at 6 in the morning. The officer finally returned. Keith signed his speeding ticket, took back his license and car documents, and said sorry again. The police officer didn't speak to Boyette. In fact, he didn't even seem to see him. 28 minutes after seeing the police car, they were driving again. Chapter 6. Thursday morning. He'd counted the days, the months, the years. But now, there were no days left. On this last morning, he asked himself if he was ready. Long ago, Donte had known how many days he had been in prison. Most prisoners knew this. But Donte had stopped counting at the same time as he lost interest in reading, writing, exercising, and eating. He still slept, dreamt, and used the toilet, but he didn't do anything else.
"This is the big day, Donte,"
the guard said when he pushed some breakfast through the little window in the metal door of Dante's cell.
"How are you doing?"
"Okay," said Donte quietly. The guard was one of the nicer ones. He left, but came back an hour later.
"You have to eat, Donte."
"Not hungry," was the only answer.
"And what about your last meal? Have you decided what you're going to order? You can have anything you want. Steak, potatoes, pizza, fish, anything."
"How about cold leather, like yesterday?"
"If that's what you want, Donte. Listen, I'll be thinking about you. You hear? I'll miss you, Donte. You're a good guy."
Donte thought it was funny that one of the guards would miss him. He sat on the edge of the bed and took out a pencil and paper. He did some math. It took some time, but he finally had a number. 2,771 days in this cell. About 4 months in a different prison before that. From his first night in a police cell in 1998, he'd spent almost 9 years locked up. During the early years, he'd waited and waited for news from the courts. The legal system seemed to move so slowly. Then it was all finished. No more appeals, no more judges for Robbie to attack. Looking back now, those years had gone quickly. In recent years, he'd told himself that he wanted to die. Death had to be better than growing old in a small, lonely cell. He already felt half dead. He wanted them to take the other half. He'd counted the days, the months, the years. But now, there were no days left. On this last morning, he asked himself if he was ready. No one really wants to die. Keith had phoned Robbie Flack's number about 12 times before a real person answered. "Robbie Flack, please," said Keith.
"I'm sorry, Mr. Flack is in a meeting,"
said his secretary, Fanta. "Listen, this is very important. My name is Keith Schrader. I'm a minister from Topeka, Kansas. I spoke with Mr. Flack yesterday. I'm driving to Sloan as we speak, and in my car, I have a man called Travis Boyette. Mr. Boyette raped and killed Nicole Yarber, and he knows where her body is. I need to speak to Mr. Flack, now." Fanta hurried through the office, collecting the team together. Robbie took the phone. "Robbie Flack speaking." "Mr. Flack, this is Keith Schrader. We spoke yesterday afternoon."
Yes, of course. Keith, the whole team is listening to this. Is that okay?
"Sure. We've been driving all night, and we should be in Sloan around noon. Travis Boyette is ready to tell his story."
Tell us about Travis,
Robbie said. Keith gave them all the information that he'd told Robbie the day before. As he spoke, members of Robbie's team started checking the facts on the internet.
Why is he talking now? What does he want?
Asked Robbie. Nothing. He's dying. A brain tumor. He says he wants to do the right thing for a change.
Where are you now?
A few miles north of the Texas border. How does this work, Robbie? Is there a chance of stopping the execution? Robbie thought for a second.
Okay, Keith. Listen. We have to meet with Boyette and ask him a lot of questions. If that goes well, we'll give him a legal document to sign. We'll take that to the judges. We have time, but not much. Keith, can I talk to him now on the phone?
Keith whispered to Boyette. Travis, this is the lawyer. He wants to talk to you.
No, thanks.
Why not? We're driving to Texas to talk to him, and here he is.
No. I'll talk when we get there.
In Robbie's office, they heard Boyette's voice. That was a good sign. At least this minister had someone else in the car with him. Maybe he wasn't a crazy guy playing games.
If we can talk to him now,
explained Robbie,
we can prepare the legal documents while you're driving.
That'll save some time, and we don't have much of it.
Keith explained this to Boyette. Immediately, Boyette bent forward and held his head with his hands. He screamed in pain.
What was that?
Asked Robbie on the phone. It was hard to talk and drive with a man screaming on the passenger seat. "I'll call you back," said Keith.
I'm going to be sick,
said Boyette, reaching for the door handle. As Keith stopped the car at the side of the road, the truck behind them almost crashed into their car, and the driver made an angry sign. Boyette opened the door and was sick for a long time. When he finally finished, Keith gave him a bottle of water.
I need to lie down,
said Boyette weakly. He stretched out in the back of the car.
Don't drive yet. I'm still sick.
Keith phoned Dana to tell her how they were doing. When he looked back at Boyette, he was being sick again. When that had stopped, Keith said, "Travis, we need to start moving. Sloan is still a long way."
Just a minute, okay? I'm not ready to move.
He was rubbing his head in pain. The phone rang. It was Robbie.
What happened?
He asked. "He has seizures," explained Keith. "They're quite frightening. I guess they're caused by the tumor."
Is the car moving now?
"No, we'll start again in a few minutes."
The minutes are passing, Keith. You understand that, right? Donte will be executed at 6 o'clock tonight.
"I know that, Robbie. If you remember, I tried to talk to you yesterday, but you weren't interested." Robbie took a deep breath.
Tell us why you believe this guy.
"Well, he knows a lot about the crime. He was in Sloan when it happened. He's raped other women. There's no real evidence against Donte Drumm. And Boyette has her ring. I can't give you more than that, Robbie. Of course, there's a small chance that he's lying."
But you're helping him leave Kansas illegally. You're committing a crime.
Don't remind me. My wife keeps talking about that too.
How soon can you be here?
In 3 hours, maybe. We've stopped for coffee a couple of times because I haven't slept for 3 nights. We had to stop for a speeding ticket too. And now Boyette's being sick all over the roadside. I'm doing the best I can, Robbie.
Hurry.
As the day began, you could feel the anger in the streets of Sloan. The police were ready for trouble. Everyone knew that the black members of the football team were refusing to play in the game tomorrow. People on the white side of town loved their football, and the black players' decision was seen as an enormous insult. And now their church had been burned down. On the black side of town, the bitterness was all about Donte Drumm. The high school day began at 8:15, but minutes later, fights had started between black and white students all over the school. There were smoke bombs in 2 of the restrooms, and people ran from the building, shouting, "Fire! Fire!" Police cars and fire trucks hurried to the scene, and the violence stopped before too much damage was done. There was a lot of mess and broken glass, and a few people had to go to the hospital with cuts. It was impossible to find out who had started the fighting, so no arrests were made. The teachers decided There would be no school that day, or the next. Many of the older boys, black and white, went home to get their guns. Donte was already in the visitor's room when his mother, sister, and 2 brothers arrived at the prison. He put his hand flat on the glass that separated him from his family. His mother put her hand opposite her son's. They stayed like that for a long time, not speaking. Donte hadn't touched his mother since the last day of the trial 8 years ago. But although they couldn't touch, they could feel each other's love through the glass. Finally, Donte spoke into the phone.
Hi, Mom. Thanks for coming. I love you. I love you too, Donte. How are you today? The same. I've already had my shower and a shave, and I have nice clean clothes. Everybody's really nice here, just before they kill you. You look great, Donte. And you, Mom. You're as beautiful as always.
During one of her first visits, Roberta had started crying. Then she couldn't stop. Afterward, Donte wrote and told her how much her tears had upset him. There had been no tears after that, not from any of his visitors. Roberta had made that clear. If you can't control yourself, leave the room.
I spoke to Robbie this morning, she said now. He has 1 or 2 more ideas for today. There's still hope, Donte. No, Mom. There's no hope. They don't care if you're innocent or guilty here in Texas. They just want to show the world that crimes are punished. I don't want you to be angry, Donte, his mother said quietly. I'm sorry, Mom, but I'm going to die angry.
Roberta took a list of names out of her bag. She showed it to Donte.
These are the people who have sent you their best wishes, she said.
She read to her son the names of neighbors, friends, and relatives, adding a little story about each person. Donte tried to smile, but his mind was on other things. Then Andrea spoke with Donte. She described the protest and the fire at the church on the white side of town. She said that the violence was going to get worse. Donte seemed to like that. He wanted his people to fight back. At 9 a.m., Robbie Flack's team were told that Dante's most recent appeal had been denied by the Court of Appeals. The judges didn't believe Dr. Hinz's report that Donte was crazy. No one had really expected a different answer. Their next step was to give the Court of Appeals the recording of Fred Pryor's most recent conversation with Joey Gamble. Fanta sent everything to Cicely Avis at the Defender Group in Austin. Cicely then printed out the documents, put the recording onto a CD, and took everything to the Court of Appeals on the other side of town. There were crowds of angry black high school students in the park in Sloan. News traveled fast by cell phone, and the crowd grew and grew. One of Sloan's best football players, Trey Glover, parked his car on the street next to the park. He opened the door and turned his sound system up loud. Angry songs by black musicians filled the air. Then people started shouting together, "Free Donte Drumm!" The words were heard right across town. There were smoke bombs. Then someone threw a brick through the window of a police car. Suddenly, there were police officers everywhere, pointing guns at the crowd. Everyone held their breath. Then the police officers relaxed. They put away their guns, and the crowd started moving along the street, following the car and loud music of Trey Glover.
"Where are you going, Trey?"
asked the black police officer.
"We're going to the courthouse,"
replied Trey.
"Keep the march peaceful, and there won't be any trouble,"
said the officer. The crowd moved slowly forward. Some people were carrying signs that they had made. "Stop the killing," and "Free Donte Drumm." People were angry, but they were having fun, too. It felt good to show the white people of Sloan their anger, and they were proud of the large numbers of protesters.